All right, I think we're going to get started. Quick announcement, there is a key for restroom if anyone needs to use it. It's restroom, keys outside, restrooms back by the elevators, I think. Thank you all for coming. I know everyone has busy schedules. We're going to be talking about some front-end tools to manage kind of your asset pipeline on the front end. A little bit about me. My name is Zan Thrash. I'm a principal consultant here at Object Partners. There are various ways you can find me online, all of which are listed there. Won't bore you with them. First, we're going to start off with why do we need tools to manage front-end assets? And I've been doing web development since late 90s, and times have really changed from web architectures of now versus what they were back in the times of yore. Circa 1996, this is what the web looked like. This was Wells Fargo. We were working with 800 by 600 viewport. Interaction was an animated GIF, and we had titles like Webmaster and other overly geeky things that had really no value to anyone. And basically, it was simple. It was like you had a browser. Talk to a web server, give me some files. Browser's like, here you go. Browser renders them. Things were easy. Then we moved on to kind of the early 2000s, late 90s, where you kind of wanted to have some sort of data collection. You wanted to have a hit counter that showed everyone how awesome your website was. You wanted to get email addresses so you can send them all your cool information. This is Apple's email collection from like mid 2000, and basically what we had to do now is use something called CGI, Common Gateway Interface, and this was basically allows your web server to talk to the file system, often written in Perl. Perl, it was responsible for parsing the request and rendering the HTML. And Perl is a great library for that because it can do those things well, but you then have to maintain that. And we all probably have a Perl joke in our back pocket. So this didn't scale very well because Perl and CGI at first were one process was spawned per request. So it was very resource intensive. There was no real structure around your code. Everyone did it differently. Basically turns into a big ball of mess after like 2 days of development. Early 2000s, we started getting into more the GSPs, the servlets, JSPs, servlets. PHP came into play, and that gave you a little more structure. You had the in-tier architecture where you have a web server delegating to some sort of other back-end server, which would then be responsible for rendering and business logic and talking to the database. So you had some separation and concerns, but early JSPs and ASP 1.0 and PHP, you're mixing your presentation, your HTML with a bunch of scriptlet tags. It wasn't maintainable. Finally, we then moved on to other architectures such as you got your struts coming into play with EJB, so you had some more separation of concerns, although they brought in other issues. There's still a lot of flux going on in that space. Finally, in 2005, 2006 area, we started to get into more so 2005, 2006 was kind of a spawned XHR requests. So we can now have our browser request information, chunks of code back to the browser for rendering. We didn't have to do full page refreshes. Gmail was kind of the model of this. Everyone went Ajax crazy. Shortly after jQuery came out in 2006 and kind of made Ajax consumable by mere mortals across browsers. So this is when we started seeing more code moving towards the front end. 2006, 2007, Rails came out, and Spring and Grails shortly thereafter. And this brought along with it, there's some other frameworks, but those were the big three in my world, that brought forth a pattern that was been known on the desktop and native apps for a long time, the MVC, where you have true separation of concerns between business logic, your models, and how the rendering is done. Still, the front end is using, we're still fetching fragments, we're still refreshing the DOM, we're still doing full page refreshes. And this is kind of a big shift, as well as far as back-end programmers. We're all still kind of cursing JavaScript as kind of a joke language at this point in time. We're not really taking it seriously. But we're doing more and more, during interviews we're checking, do you know jQuery or Scriptaculous or one of the other prototype, one of the other Ajax-y DOM manipulation front-end frameworks, just to kind of do it. But that kind of becomes unmaintainable once you start going. So in about 2007, we see this explosion and need for a mobile web. So we have business entities wanting to support multiple front ends with the same back-end code. So there's a shift in mindset to do this using jQuery. It doesn't work. We kind of have the same problems as we had on the back end when we were using just like GSPs and scriptlets, where it's not real structured, it's unmaintainable. Everyone's doing it their own separate way. So you see an explosion of front-end web frameworks to handle this MVC type pattern that we've had on the back end for a while, now on the front end. You see the Angular backbone was like the first one come out. Angular is very popular. Ember is another popular one, and there's probably 2 other dozen that I could probably think of but aren't worth mentioning. And then in 2009, another kind of parallel shift came, and that was the Node.js came out. And this kind of took the notion of one language to rule them all. You could do front end, back end, all the way to the database if you want to use Mongo and JavaScript. And that is kind of, that Node, the introduction in Node also spawned a bunch of tools that are based off Node to manage all of these JavaScript assets that you were using everywhere now. So that's kind of what the talk of this is some of those tools that have come out of the Node space that you don't necessarily need to be developing a Node app to bring into your tool chain and your workflow. If you're going with a more JavaScript heavyweight front end, they become very useful. And then along with all the frameworks, you see just an explosion of libraries, JavaScript templating libraries, just utility libraries such as underscore, different ways to write your assets. So you have CoffeeScript for JavaScript typekit, ClojureScript. You have Sass and Less for rendering or for writing your CSS in a more cleaner way. You also see tools to let you write your HTML markup, such as like Jade and Markdown and like Haml, that have come out of some of the Ruby space as well. All these tools become usable once you have a way to manage them. So you have way more front-end code. That's basically where we're operating today than you have, even I would say 3 years ago. I've been seeing the need for developers write way more front-end code. Back-end code is still important, but you don't have the divide between the two camps of front-end developer and back-end developer. Those lines are blurring, where you kind of need a full-stack developer to be able to negotiate both sides of that conversation. More tasks. So you're introducing all these other libraries and ways to write your assets, you need to basically manage those assets. Plus, when we have mobile, you need to worry about things such as minification of your CSS and your JavaScript. You need to be able to concatenate or bundle these resources so you're not making so many calls to your server. Compress them so they're small using like a gzip utility. We want to do cache busting, so when we rev our scripts, that the browser will automatically pull down the new one without having to, so you don't get in a weird janky resource not loading issue. And then there's the transpiling or compiling. It's basically creating one asset and that is not usable by the browser yet into an asset that is usable to the browser. So your Sass or your less into CSS, your CoffeeScript into JavaScript, your Markdown into HTML. So when you have all these repetitive tasks and you put them together with lazy programmers, which most programmers worth their salt are lazy, they build tools. And that's kind of what we're going to go through today. I'm going to go into the command line and we're just going to start looking at these tools, running through what they can bring to you. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, interrupt me. I've been using these for a while, so I'm not an expert, but I have real-world experience on where they fall down and where they excel. So please interrupt. So the first thing we're going to look at is, let me just pull up is NPN. And NPN is, unofficially, it's the Node Package Manager. And like, the joke is that's not what it stands for, but it's called NPN because that was the name of the command line, and the author of NPN liked it because he could type it with one hand on a QWERTY keyboard. So NPN comes with Node, so I'm not going to go in installing Node, but it's fairly easy. You just go to nodejs.org, hit install, and you're good to go. It works across all environments, Linux, Windows, and Mac. So first thing, we'll just do NPN version. This is 1.139. The next thing we're going to do is look at, it has a very nice help system where it gives you, basically these are the docs that are on the website. So if you don't want to, if you like being in the command line, then this is a good way to go. And a lot of this is not really pertinent to this talk. It's more of like if you're creating a Node package yourself. But there are some gems in there which are worth looking at. One of them is often like, where's all this stuff going to install on my box when you're pulling down these assets. And so you could do npm root, which will show you where it's going to install stuff. These are not the binaries, but the scripts that it's installing. You could do npm bin, which will show you where your binaries will install. And this is all pointing, as you can see, is pointing to the directory that I'm in. Normally, what we're going to be doing is not doing them to the local directory, but globally. You can run the same things, the same commands with a G. And that'll show you it's going to write everything to my user local bin and user local lib modules. So that's where everything will be installing. You can update NPN and all NPN modules by using the update command. So if you do this, it's very meta, it'll update itself. I have the most recent version, so I'm not going to waste the bandwidth on that one. And another thing where it shines is discovery and information gathering on node modules that you want to use. So the first one we're going to install is Bower. So we'll search for Bower. And this is basically updating the local registry, just fetching the most local registry files. And you can see that there's a lot of things that are tagged with Bower. The one we're interested in is just Bower. And if you're not sure which one you're interested in, or you need to pull down, you could do like, there's an info. Which will give you all the metadata on that package. So you can see here the name, the description of what it is, all the versions, and these are basically versions in a GitHub repo. Maintainers with their email addresses, all of the tag check-ins, which are what the versions are based off of. You can see when they were last updated. So 1.2.4 was last updated 5 days ago. So you can see that, and they update frequently, and these things are fast moving, so keeping on top of the most recent version it's not hard to do, but you just have to do it, and we'll show you how you can. NPM allows you to just update to the latest version, or you can specifically pick a version you want to use very easily. So we're just going to install Bower. And the joke is, like, it's like if you're familiar with Maven or any dependency management system, it pulls down half the internet. But it also pulls down all of its dependencies, so it's why it looks like it's so much. So you can see here that, so I pulled down Bower locally because I didn't put the -g flag. But you can see it's pulling down all the dependencies. It's giving you a nice ASCII tree graph of all the dependencies that it's pulling down and where it installed. And this is just under node modules. And I'm going to blow that away. And I have to sudo that. So again, pulling it down. And this time it installed into user local lib node modules Bower, but it gave me a nice symlink as well, so I can just use the Bower command, and then all of the those are the bins, and then all the modules that it's dependent on are installed under there. So now we have Bower installed. We can do Bower version 1.2. And the first thing, Bower, it doesn't need it, but you want to, if you're doing this in a project base with a team, you want to create a bower.json file, which will just be kind of a metadata file for all of your dependencies. And so I'm going to back up. What Bower does is it allows you to pull down JavaScript assets. That's all it does, and it uses GitHub as the repo. So now that we have Bower, we can search for assets that we want to pull down. Let's say our project, we want to use jQuery. And this is pulling down a lot of things because jQuery has a lot of plugins. But we want, so it gives us a list. We want this jQuery. We can verify it with, that's the jQuery. That's where the component is on the GitHub repo. If we're not sure if that's the one, we can also call info on the one. This is going to give us kind of a layout of its bower.json file, most recent version, kind of where everything is, and then all of the versions that are available. And these are just tags in the GitHub repo. That's what the versions are based off of. We can also do you can use the lookup to just get the GitHub repo. That's something we could do. And we can also go use the home script to oops. So this will take us actually to the GitHub repo, so you don't have to look it up. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and install. Actually, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our bower.json file. Okay, so I have a bower.json file already created, but let's show you how to create that. Bower init will, so it takes the name of the file you're in as the name. If you want to call it something else, you can. Otherwise, you can just hit enter. Let's bump this up to that version, description, demo. Main file doesn't really come into play because we're not actually creating a Bower module. This doesn't really matter. The authors pulls off your GitHub global config. You can add more if you want. Let's go with that. And then you can set your license, homepage. And if you have any installed dependencies at this point, it'll add those to your bower.json. So we'll just say yes and yes to that. And since we're not publishing this, we will mark it private. And here's kind of a layout of what it's going to look right out for us. So this is all the metadata about our project. And we'll just say yes. So now we have a bower.json file. Exactly what it showed us. Let's kick this over there. And then we're going to install jQuery. So let's say for this project we want to install an older version of jQuery. Can't type. You can set the version number with a hash and then the one you want. And then if we look at our Bower, oops. So that installed it, but it didn't update our metadata. And that's what we want to do. If you put the save dev flag, it'll reinstall it, but then it'll also add this to our metadata. And the benefit of this is you can now take this file and so it installed everything in Bower components. You can then take this file, check it in your Git repo, and then everyone can go and just run Bower install. They can pull it down, run Bower install, and it'll pull down everything. So you don't have to check all these artifacts in your repo. And it's probably advisable that you don't, because you're basically checking GitHub repos into GitHub repos. So you want to put those, assuming you're using GitHub or Git, you want to put that in your ignore file and just have everyone pull it down. And you can do the same thing for like your CI machine. You can script this all out because it's all command line, and you can just have your CI machine just run git install or bower install, and it'll just pull down everything, put it in the right place, and you're linking all in your when you're sourcing these in your HTML file, you're sourcing directly from the components directory. So you can see in this tree bower components, you can see that this is essentially just, it's the GitHub repo for jQuery, and it gives you the min, it gives you, looks like it's giving source maps now, which is kind of cool. And then, you know, your dev version. So you're just sourcing off of these. Now, so what happens if you want to like upgrade your version of jQuery? You can tell your whole dev team to like pull down jQuery, whatever, 2. I forgot what the 2.03, like, or you just want to try it locally to see what it looks like and if how badly it breaks your system. You can just go, you can just change it in here. I should probably buy that someday. And then you could just do bower install, and it's going to pull down oh, it doesn't say. Well, it's so the nice thing is it's pulling down the new artifacts, but you don't have to change your mappings. You can then check the version by using bower ls to see what's installed under that, and it'll give you jQuery 2.03. That's the one you're using. If you wanted to go, if you want to go back to 191, save that, tell your team to run bower install again. And then bower ls. So we're back to 191, and it's also telling us that the latest is 2.03. So it kind of gives you that little heads up check that you're not running on the newest sexy version of that library. Now this is cool when you have like single libraries you want to bring down, but more and more of these frameworks have dependencies. And one of the ones that comes to mind is Backbone Marionette, which has dependencies on, which is kind of a meta framework around Backbone. Has dependencies on Backbone and underscore. So if we do can't type. It's gonna, you can see it pulled down the latest version of Marionette, which is 1.10. It also pulled down Backbone 1.0 and then underscore 1.5.1. And if we did that with this, it does cache, so you don't have to make that hit to the browser every time. You can see here it's only bringing down the top level dependency. We don't need to say that we're going to use underscore and the version of actual Backbone, because it tracks all that in Backbone Marionette's package.json file. So it's really handy. And you can override that if you want to use a newer version of underscore or whatnot. And then you can do bower ls, and this will give you a nice ASCII art, like this one, and then here's the dependencies and all of that. So that's essentially Bower. It's just purely for asset discovery and installation. It does one thing and does it really well. Any questions on that? Because I'm going to move on to Grunt next. Okay. Grunt is kind of where if you don't know what Grunt is think ant, rake, make, star.ake, any Gradle for front-end assets. It's basically a task-based asset management tool that lets you do anything you want pretty much with any asset. It's got a lot of development. A lot of big companies are using it. jQuery uses it. Yeoman uses it, and we'll talk about Yeoman in a little bit. But basically, it's very cool, and I hope we'll give a quick demo. So we're going to install it. Through npm, again, globally. So, did I not? Yeah. So globally, here's all of its dependencies. These are all node artifacts. If you're interested, take a look because there's some cool stuff in there, but I'm not going to go into it right now. But we can see what version of actually. So I messed up because Grunt is not a command line. You need to install Grunt CLI, which is what we're going to do. I've given this talk 3 times, and these things move so fast that I have to redo the talk every single time. So I apologize for the inconsistencies. So we're installing Grunt CLI, which is the command line interface for Grunt. And what this does is it gives you a separation from installing Grunt and running Grunt. So if you wanted to use an old version of Grunt across multiple projects, you don't have to install it globally. It's on a per project basis. If that makes sense. There was a big switch over from the 3x version, or O.3x version, to the O.4 version of Grunt. They did a lot of breaking changes, so some of the plugins aren't. Most of them are now, but there was for a while there were some that weren't up to the 4.0 way of doing things. We also need to install. So to run Grunt, you need 2 files. You need a package.json file in your directory and a grunt file.js. And going the Grunt way is a lot. There's a lot of manual stuff to do, and we'll kind of show you the pain points there. But we also need to install Grunt init. Which is, it kind of gives you some bootstrap Grunt file generation that you can use. So the first thing we want to do is create a package.json file, and because package.json is a npm artifact, npm has a command that lets you just stub out one, and we're going to use this in a similar fashion that we were using the bower.json file as kind of a dependency management metadata holder. So we want to run npm init. Let's try spelling that right. And this is basically just going to go us through the same kind of questionnaire style that we've seen before. We don't really care about most of this stuff, so I'm just going to power through it. And say yes. So now we have a package.json file, which Looks like that. And now we want to create a grunt file. And there's better ways to do this, but the brute force way to do it is you can either roll it your own, just call it gruntfile.js and figure it out. But Grunt has generators to stub out these, and those are you can install those generators into your at your root, your user root. There is a dot grunt init folder, which will you can install. And basically this is just a git clone of these generators into this directory. And the one we're going to use is a grunt file. Grunt is actually going away from this, and they're saying they're advocating you use Yeoman to do all this generation, but you can still do it. And I'm just going to give a small high-level overview of what you can do. So we're going to use the grunt init command, and then pass in the generator that we want to use, which is this grunt file one. And again, it's just going to ask you a series of questions. Is the DOM going to be involved in any way? Probably. Will you be concatenating or minifying? Yes. Do you have a package.json file? Yes. No. And then we can go and look at, we now have a grunt file. And let's see. Can you all see? Let's just pull this. So here's kind of the loose structure of a grunt file. You have a module, and this is this is definitely in the style of Node. So you have it's all JavaScript. It's all JSON basically. Well, this is JavaScript, but the body is JSON. So function, we're initiating something. This gives us a package. This is reading the metadata out of our package to create this banner. And this banner is kind of something you can, when you minify something, you can have this pre-pinned to your final artifacts. So if you're rolling up a bunch of JSON and your legal team says you need to put this into your body, you can use this function. Concat is a task that just basically takes stuff from, in this pattern you see it all over. You have an options. It's saying use a banner, strip banners. Not quite sure what that does. But then the distribution, these are subtasks. And this is saying everything from this source that has a JS description with whatever we named our package, assuming we're using this convention. Move it and concatenate it all into a single file at this path. Uglify is a minification tool that lets you basically strips out all the white space, does variable renaming, so everything's super small, reduces the size of your files quite a bit. If there's another one that's Google, can't remember. There's another minification one that's very popular, but Uglify is really good. JS Hint gives you, it's like static analysis on all of your JavaScript, so you can set up rules similar to like CodeNarc or PMD or one of those find bugs if you are familiar with that on the back end for JavaScript or Java. This does something similar. And basically these are the options, these are the rules, and then grunt file is just a subtask that's saying, basically lint my grunt file, and then this is just a subtask, and these could be named anything. And if it's in any of these source directories, so the lib and the test, we don't have a project under this. This is just kind of what it scaffolds out for you. All this needs to be changed, but it kind of it gives you placeholders. Watch is an interesting task and very useful. It basically spins up a thread on your command line, so it will watch and execute tasks when any file changes. So if this one is saying if the grunt file changes, execute this grunt file task, which is basically saying JS hint off. It's basically saying run JS hint subtask grunt file. So you can imagine, like, you change a CoffeeScript file and you set it to watch all your CoffeeScript files, and then it kicks off the CoffeeScript compiler to convert it to JSON and move it to the package or directory where you want it to go. You can start. This is how you get into your minification or your asset management pipeline. You could set up different subtasks for different environments. So if you have, you're going to have something different from in dev versus something when you package up your whole app and distribute it to a production server. And then here we're just running. This is just loading all of the plugins. So Grunt is a plugin-based architecture. All tasks are a plugin that you need to install via npm into your locally into your local directory structure. And then here is just where you can register groups of tasks. So default is running. If you do grunt.default, it'll run JS hint, QUnit, concat, uglify. So you can get that pipeline, that asset management chain going, and you can do as many ones as you want. It's very, very configurable. And there are a ton of plugins. I mean, let's go. Anything you can think of that you might want to use probably has a plugin, and there are I think there's last I checked there was like 1,000, 1,100 plugins just for Grunt to do various things. There's ones that are prefixed with contrib, and these are ones that the Grunt team has created themselves, so they kind of have a little more weight behind them because they seem to know what they're doing. So clean basically will clean out directories. Coffee is doing the transpiling of CoffeeScript to JS. Compass is doing your Sass and Compass compilation. Concat, Connect will spin up a node Connect middleware server. So if you want to use that to feed your local projects, you can do it. Copy, move stuff, linting. I mean, anything you can think of probably can be done here. There's one if you want to, for an example, I had a front-end developer who wanted to, every time his JavaScript tests pass, he wanted to do a commit to GitHub automatically. And because you can script out GitHub, there's an executable where you can just run the git commit directly right after those tests pass. So it became a little too chatty, so we dialed it back. But you can do stuff like if you want to compile your JavaScript through this or your Java through this, it can be done. So yeah, it's worth poking around to get a feel for what's going on. Am I doing on time? Okay, 15 minutes. I got Yeoman next. So Yeoman is a Google project that was at one point competing directly with Grunt, and they decided to kind of back off from that. It was basically Grunt with Bower installed, with using Bower in the backend and Grunt in the backend, but being very opinionated. If your project was going to be CoffeeScript, Sass, and I think those were the two. It had to use those two because it wouldn't do anything else. So about 6 months ago, they decided that, you know, we should probably specialize in one thing, and you guys can do what you do well. We'll do what we do well. And I think they made a great choice because Yeoman does use Grunt side by side, but it's not completely dependent. Well, it is dependent, but Yeoman's more of a framework generator. So if you want to start a project, if you want to start an Angular project from scratch, Yeoman is the way you want to go. And I'll just show you real quickly how that works. So again, it's npm install yo is the command, and that is going to bar. Oh. Yeoman has a lot of dependencies. This might take a while. You know what? I did it again. Sorry. Okay. Demo gods. Okay, there we go. So we have the key, we have the command yo, which, so when you run yo, you get this, which is like awesome. When I first saw this, I was like, wow, that is impressive. And then I was like, where did they spend most of their time? Hopefully it wasn't just on this. And if you've used Yeoman and you haven't used it in like the last week or 2 weeks when they just went 1.0, it's definitely worth taking a look at because there's been a lot of impressive enhancements to it. And again, Yeoman uses generators, and you can. Right now, I have 3 generators installed. I have the Angular Mocha, which is a testing framework, and Web App Generator. And from here, you can update your generators. You can install another generator, and there are a lot of other generators that you can do. I wrote a custom generator. It's probably out of date now because it doesn't adhere to the new 1.0 standard, but like using a generator for Angular and Grails projects. So if you want to install a generator, you can. It's basically a search npm. So if you want to do a Backbone project, there's 10 generators, 8 generators that you can Backbone with AMD. I don't know what Mario is, but it must have a keyword in there. PhoneGap if you want to do phone Backbone. So we'll just do the Angular one real quick. And this asks you a bunch of questions. Would you like to include Twitter Bootstrap? Well, yeah. Who wouldn't? You want to use the Sass version of Twitter Bootstrap? That's what all the cool kids are doing. And then these are just other resources where you can install that are kind of outside Angular core. Oh, let's try this. So we're going to do do that again. Yes, yes, yes. Pulls down all of the internet. If you, I mean, there is caching on your, it does do caching, so it's not making all of these calls, hopefully. Apparently it's running some tests. Okay, so that's clever. So let's see what that gave us. What is going on? So this is the full. This is everything that was generated for us. So it's giving us an app directory with a bunch of pre-installed Bower components, jQuery, a bunch of Angular stuff. It has the Bootstrap images. We have, these are our JavaScript files. So we have an app.js, which is an Angular, kind of the main. We have a controller. We have our styles, and then a view. But let's go look at our Grunt file, because this is where kind of Angular shines, is kind of scaffolding out this. So this is our standard modules, kind of some high-level Yeoman configs that are giving us some variables that we can use. The watch file that's watching our CoffeeScript files, if we have any CoffeeScript, running our tests, if we have any CoffeeScript, or not running our tests, but just watching for any changes, and then executing our tests if any of them change, which is cool. Compiling our style sheets from, this is actually moving our style sheets. And this one, is anyone familiar with Live Reload? Has anyone used that in a project? Live Reload is like, it's like a basket full of kittens shooting rockets. It's a bucket full of awesome. And I'll give a demo of what it can do here real quick. We'll just walk through some of the other tasks. Coffee is just doing CoffeeScript compilations. JS hinting is doing the hinting, except it's storing all of the configuration options in a JS hint RC file versus our other Grunt file was inlining them. Compass is doing our Sass. Rev, this is doing cache busting, so it's hashing and caching and then putting that basically an MD5 checksum at the end of each of our artifacts so browsers can refresh them. Useman is a package that will bundle all of your assets that you are declaring in. I'll show that one to you real quick because it's actually kind of cool. So if you just use, Useman uses these comments in your HTML wrapped around what you want to bundle. So it'll bundle all of these into a plugins.js, all these into a modules.js. And then it will also rewrite this file to have a script source to those artifacts. So if you're familiar with like the resources plugin in Grails, anyone? This does that. In my opinion, it does it better. But that's another conversation. So back to our Grunt file. You could do image manipulation. So if you want to compress your images, there's image min, SGmin is doing that. CSS is, you can compress your CSS files as well as HTML, just to get everything as small as possible. Copy is just moving stuff around. And then we'll go down to the bottom where all of our tasks are set up. So server, this is the one that's going to it's going to clean all of our artifacts. It's going to spin up the server, which is going to be a connect middleware, and serve up our HTML. Auto prefixer, I don't know what that one is, but then it's going to spin up our live reload server, and it's going to open and then set the watch command. So I'm just going to do grunt.server here. It gives you metrics on how fast stuff is running. So this is basically our website that we created with almost no effort. It's like 15 characters of typing. But then I just want to demo live reload real quick. So we're going to do, damn it. So this is a SAS file, and it is there's a watch task that will monitor if this file changes, and it will then run it through the SAS compiler to create CSS, and then it's going to trigger live reload, which, if everything works right, it will refresh our browser with the change. So we're going to change the background color to red. So you can do, there is some delay with the SAS compilation. If you were doing this with straight CSS, it would be almost instantaneous. So that's live reload. You can set it up to monitor your GSPs, your JSPs, any of those file changes, and you're running in a browser. You can just code and go. You don't have to take that extra step to toggle over. Hit Command R. If you have front end devs, they go nuts over this. It's like Halloween and Christmas and their birthday all rolled together.
Is that just a JavaScript plugin that gives a message to?
Yeah. Basically, it's spinning up a live reload server on the back end. You can see that when we spun it up, here we go, connect. So it's spinning up an NPN connect server with a middleware server and then it's loading our JavaScript. So that's our local server, the 9000, but it's also, if you look at the grunt file, this will give it a little better understanding. So up at the top, we have our live reload port, which is that's the standard 35729 is a standard live reload port. So it's firing up a live reload server, and then this is then injecting the live reload JavaScript tag into your page. So it's not, you don't have to write it. I mean, you could put it in there, but it's doing it for you. And that way, when you go to production, it's not there. You don't have to put some sort of block around it. So that's all I got for you guys. Any questions? No? Well, thanks for coming out.
Can you use this in combination? I mean, if you really want to go old school and use Ant or Maven or something, you can have it fire off run commands.
Sure, yeah. I went down the path of, in our CI environment, using Jenkins to have a Gradle script to wrap this, but it was proving to be not really needed because you can just execute commands from Jenkins directly. But yeah, you can definitely do it. Anything that you can call a command line is, yeah, you can use. I haven't done it with Ant or Maven, but I would imagine it's very possible. All right. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or hit me up on Twitter or whatnot. I'm happy to help. I do answer emails. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I am doing this every day on a project right now, and I've been very happy with it. And I hope you guys took away something.